Thanks for having me, and thanks to the organizers for putting this together, National Institute of Aging. Quick thought experiment. Let's say that the entire R&D budget of the world was put all into National Institute of Aging, and we were going to do the massive aging study. All of the world leaders of all of the nations and territories said this is now our top priority. What would that study be? So we might disagree on the methods and the research questions and the hypotheses, but I think that one of the things we could agree on is that we'd want to study as many people as possible so that we could have as generalizable and as large a sample as possible to be able to say something, not just about the samples that we get, but about the people in the world today and all their heterogeneity and all of their different contextual and social factors and biological factors. So that's the ideal. Unfortunately, we are bound by geography and resource limitations, and so typically the typical lab study is based on people that we can get access to in a particular geographical region that we have the resource to be able to test. So, hopefully that gives us enough statistical power, enough generalizability to answer the specific question or test the specific hypothesis we have in mind, but, there is a platonic ideal of an aging study that is much larger. So I think as of 2015, we have a bit of an opportunity now. So 3.1 million people, as of last year, have access to the internet. So to do another quick thought experiment, if you could test everyone who had access to the internet on things that could be done on the internet, that would potentially be a very, very large, very nice study that would allow you to characterize age-related differences in a way that would never have been possible. Again, this is another thought experiment, maybe a little bit closer to reality, but still not quite possible. However, another feature of the world today is that people not only are on the internet, but they're actually connected to each other. So this is just Facebook, a map from 2010, so it's much denser now, looking at Facebook friendships across the world. So the idea is that you could, say, send a recruitment flyer to someone here in Hawaii, and then have that recruitment flyer reach the entirety of the Facebook network. If you could find a way to get that information to be transmitted to that network, get people to share that information, and have it be compelling enough that it's something that people want to read and ultimately participate in. So that's great. The unfortunate part of this is the type of information that tends to get transmitted through those networks is not our recruitment flyers, our research studies, our exciting research questions and hypotheses, but stuff that's more like this. People are participating in large numbers in research-like studies on the internet, but the questions that they're asking and answering are questions like these. What kind of cat are you? How long would you survive the zombie apocalypse? Things like the Myers-Briggs, which are getting a little bit closer to the research world. I found out I'm an ENTJ just like Darth Vader, so that's interesting. So people are actually doing assessments that are vaguely related to cognitive, social, personality things online in extraordinarily large numbers. This information is being transmitted through that network. How do we get our work and our studies to be like, what kind of cat are you, and reach the sorts of numbers that these things do reach? So one way of approaching this is to consider the motivations and goals of the participants, the person who is on Facebook, online, doing things and transmitting information to their friends and their networks. So a research study, I think one way to think about it is that a research study doesn't just enable us to learn about people, but it enables people to learn something about themselves. So if there's a way to return interesting research results to people that allows them to meet their own goals and learn something about themselves, that's maybe a way to get this network to start spreading that information and make it something that's hopefully as interesting to the participant as it is to us. So about 8 years ago, we created a platform called testmybrain.org, which is based on a citizen science model. The idea is that the participant is a stakeholder. They are a scientist themselves, and the thing they're trying to understand is their own mind. So we provide tools that they then can use and participate in studies. We get the research results that we can generalize from, hopefully, and they also get the results from their specific participation, their specific test, which they can do whatever they want with. Quick cognitive test, one taken from Test My Brain. Can anyone recognize any of these three people? Hopefully at least one. So this is President Barack Obama. This is David Beckham, for those of you who are in more of the soccer European world, and Paul McCartney. So this is an example of a type of study we have online. So I come from the face recognition world originally. So one of our first sets of tests we were putting online were all to do with recognizing faces, social perception, emotion identification, that kind of thing. At the end of a test, someone would, in the famous faces test, they would see the faces and try to identify them, and they get a result like this. So it says what the test is, it says what the person's score is, and then it also says the average score on that test converted into a percentile. So it's a fairly simple type of feedback based on the score. We're not trying to pathologize anything or give them a diagnostic cutoff or anything. It's very much just, where do you fall in the distribution? How does that compare to the average? What was your score? And people find this sort of information compelling and shareable. To date, we've had more than 1.5 million people participate in studies on testmybrain.org, so it works almost as well as what kind of cat are you? So that's been quite good, and as you see, it's not just, you know, people from a very specific geographic region, but it's actually people from all over the world, including stick figures wearing capes. Who comes to Test My Brain? This is a map of the world at night, so you can see the population centers represented in terms of lights. And this is one particular study we ran on Test My Brain. So you can see that the geographical distribution is very similar to the geographical distribution of the population of the world. And at this point, we've tested someone from almost every major country and territory in the world, with the exception of North Korea. Reasons for participation. So why are people doing this? This was based on 3 responses to the question, why are you doing this? People give a variety of reasons, but if you kind of categorize them, they roughly fall into these sorts of recreation, self-knowledge, interest in the mind sorts of reasons. So it's not things that are very clinical or education-based usually, but more just kind of messing around the internet during your lunch break or when the kids are asleep. There is a subset of people that talk about cognitive deficits, particularly people who are getting older and are worried about memory decline and familial Alzheimer's, that sort of thing. Some people are doing brain training. I'm not sure how that works, but I think they just do every cognitive test that exists on the internet. And then there are students who are there to learn more about things related to their coursework, and then things that are hard to categorize. This first one, Prove I'm Smarter Than My Spouse, we almost created a category for it, because there were so many people saying, Prove I'm Smarter Than My Spouse, my roommate, my sister, my brother, my, you know, whatever. So it's a motivation and one to understand. Data quality is something people worry about a lot, and we've done a lot of systematic comparisons of data quality on the web versus the lab. So for example, here you see these dark bars are web samples versus lab samples, and just quickly going across different cognitive domains, face recognition, social perception, verbal memory, this one's forward digit span. You see roughly comparable results in terms of means and standard deviations, and reliability as well when comparing the web samples versus different people being tested in the lab in broad contexts. So what can we learn about age-related differences in cognitive function from this sort of thing? The first study we did was looking at face recognition. So we had this huge corpus of, in this case it was 44,000 people who had completed a face recognition test. And we wanted to know, does face recognition seem to improve across adolescence? That was our sort of research question. And what we found is that the performance of people from age 10 to 20 was improving, or was different, but the peak performers were people in their early 30s. And that was a little bit surprising, and we thought this is probably something to do with the web and self-selection biases and, you know, people who are coming to the site who are in their early 30s. So we decided that we needed to replicate the classic findings on the web to see if this was something that was really self-selection or if there were actually replicable things we could find. So, classic difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence, many of you are familiar with. Fluid intelligence peaks early, crystallized continues to improve until later life. We use digit symbol substitution test, or a web-based version of that, to look at fluid intelligence. So it's a test of processing speed, how quickly you can match shapes and numbers. And this is what we found. This is a sample of 10,000. We found improvements till about age 20. This fuzziness is standard error, and then declines across the rest of the span. Looking now at vocabulary, so this is a good test of verbal knowledge and crystallized intelligence, we found in the same sample that performance was increasing across the lifespan, and really no sign of a plateau, and these people were continuing to improve up until retirement age. What was interesting, though, is that when we started looking at other domains of fluid intelligence, because we had this large sample and the resolution to really start looking at subtle midlife-related differences, we saw that both verbal and visual working memory had distinct age-related differences, and in fact there was more of a broad plateau from age 20 to 35, and not this steep change, before you get a much more gentle decrease into older age. So that was interesting. One thing that we thought was most certainly the case is that we had a self-selection bias in our older group. People who are on the internet who are age 65 to 70 who are doing cognitive tests are probably not your typical older person in the United States. So we dug a bit into that. We wanted to know, is the fact that this keeps improving something about our sample, or is it something that perhaps is real? There's almost certainly self-selection biases related to performance, but the overall pattern, is the overall pattern accurate? We dug into the General Social Survey, which does a vocabulary test as part of its national questionnaire. And we looked at data from the 1970s and 80s, the 1980s and 90s, and then the most recent decade. And what we found is that the peak of vocabulary ability was changing such that the most recent cohort was continuing to have, the best vocabulary was in people who were around age 65, very much like our sample. So it looks like a little bit scary. But for older adults, test norms from 15 to 20 years ago might no longer apply because of differences potentially in education, in health, in intellectual engagement in the workplace, and all those sorts of things. So our norms are something that is actively changing, at least for older adults. We've since done this across different cognitive domains. This is kind of a hodgepodge, looking at things related to intelligence, related to this was number sense, sustained attention, which seems to be best among people in their 40s, social intelligence, which is very much plateauing and doesn't decrease, and then aspects of memory. So the idea is using large samples on the web to really look at subtle differences in these cognitive abilities, particularly in that middle life period that we tend to neglect because it's working adults who have families and busy lives and they're not volunteering for research studies, but they do this sort of thing. I have 1 minute, so I'm going to kind of skip through this part. Improving cognitive assessment. When we have large samples, you can do lots of fun stuff. You can optimize measurement characteristics with things like item response theory. You can optimize accessibility by improving instructions. People give you very honest feedback on the web about whether they think your experiment is crap, and sometimes that feedback is actually quite useful. And we have a rapid cycle of development validation to basically say, is something reliable, is it valid, does it correlate with the things it should correlate with, using the fact that we get such high traffic. And then finally, optimizing engagement. People rate experiments. Anything that gets less than 3 stars drops off the site, and we edit it until it gets more than 3 stars. And also trying different types of recruitment. So for example, I work a lot in psychiatry. When we had a study called postpartum depression, we had a lot of women coming on and say, yeah, well, I had these experiences, but like I love my children, like I'm not this person. When we did Calling All Mothers, we got a very similar group of people with very similar clinical characteristics, but who were now much happier to participate in the study and doing it in much larger numbers. So at this point, we have about 50 neuropsychological tests we've adapted for the web that we've validated in various ways. And I want to end on this one point, that I think that we're in a moment, because of the growth of social networks and internet and the spread of information, that we have both a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity to build studies that are open, mobile, participant-centered, and personalized in order to engage people, but also a challenge to do it in such a way that's ethical. I think right now the market is flooded with companies that are doing stuff like this, targeted at older adults in a very unethical way. And if that's the only resource available to these people, then that's the only resource they're going to use. So I think that there's both an ethical, a social, and a scientific mandate on us to, kind of take advantage and explore these sorts of domains. Thank you to everyone that I have worked with ever that has supported this, including folks at Harvard and MGH, and of course the volunteers at Test My Brain and the Many Brains Project.